10 years old, it's okay. So please keep that in mind. That will help you reduce your high school stress. You have a good time management skills early on in upper elementary school to middle school. So just at that point, thank you, Jay. And I'm going to wrap this up. I realize I'm standing between you and the door and your family, so I don't want to do that. Project-based learning, that's a new concept probably to many of us. And when I heard about a week ago, I went home, I did research, being a scientist for 20 years. And then I actually talked to my daughter who's in 5th grade. My son, by the way, is in junior high, so I have a test in both schools. So I had a reasonable amount of experience about their tank or whatever. So my son, my kids actually, they have been engaging in sort of similar activity, and may not be strictly termed as PBL yet. And I also reach out along with other parents to other parents in the state, even call my friends in California. But anyway, long story short, we've done a little bit of homework. So what we come up with is project-based learning to us is high-level learning, to be honest with you. It takes a prerequisite knowledge, and you have to apply that, integrate that into a more complex situation. And then there's many benefits by PBL. And also it presents a lot of challenges. Just to say the least, they probably lack of standard result you can measure success. And the teacher, given we're a public school, you probably don't have the ideal teacher-student ratio to successfully plan and execute the PBL. So, long story short, what we feel like, first of all, we may have a couple questions to clarify. Like I didn't say, we don't want to blow something out of proportion unnecessarily. So we felt maybe not a good idea just yet. We replace the traditional classroom learning and teaching. When I say traditional, meaning for lack of a better word, we're really doing for generations across the world. So those reasonable success, right? So we don't feel like we should broadly implement replacing the current existing system. Maybe that wasn't the intention at all. And it probably will be helpful to supplement that, the current teaching model. But the more important we want to understand, what is the key purpose, the PBL strategic key purpose we want to think about now. And also, what's the difference between the PBL and the projects the kids are already doing? Is there actually essential difference there? And then, what is the school district thinking in terms of contemplating a draft stepwise plan in implementing PBL, if that is actually the actual direction you want to go? And if so, which grades or schools to be involved to what extent? Sorry, one more question. And is there anything else we misunderstood the entire concept you'd like to elaborate on to help the parents understand the PBL? And also, before you actually make the decision, you will engage the parents and say, hey, we are starting from elementary school or somewhere like that. So I think
those were really good questions, and I agree with a lot of what you said. When I first arrived in Lexington, I think a question was in the air about, are we doing PBL district-wide in every class? And the question was in the air, not just with parents, but also with teachers. Hey, what's the expectation? What are we supposed to do? This doesn't exactly fit with what maybe I'm doing in math class at the high school. Is it expected for everybody in the system? And one of the things that we did at one of our joint councils, probably right around December, I would say, is to, first of all, talk to teachers, talk to administrators at joint council to say, this is an option, it's a tool, you don't have to use it in every situation. So the first answer to the question of, is this expected elementary through high school, is no. What is expected is that teachers can dabble with it, and if it's useful and if it makes sense in their curriculum, they should utilize it. So I'll give you, I had some of the same questions that you had when I first heard about PBL, because I have that mindset of the projects and also the aspiration to have the complex thinking, which doesn't always happen in those project-based experiences. So I used to be a curriculum director in another state. That was my job in different school systems, and we were part of a consortium. And in that consortium, they tried to form interdisciplinary, this is 1,000 years ago, so don't worry, this is a long time ago. But they tried to form interdisciplinary units. It was kind of a PBL effort. And one of the units, happened to be in the state of Maine, the Penobscot River runs through the state of Maine. One of the units was, how do you get oranges down the Penobscot River? So that in itself is problematic, because who cares if you put an orange down the Penobscot River, right? So this is kind of like the mindset for, all right, what kinds of projects are we really doing with kids, and are they meaningful? And by the way, when you try to integrate math into how do you get oranges down the Penobscot River, it's just like this tiny little sliver, and you don't really get to your math content, so it just doesn't work. So I have been talking to a lot of teachers. I have been talking to a lot of students, including students today, and I have been learning what I can learn about PBL. I've gone through exercises and experienced it myself to say, is this something that would be useful and effective in the school? Just today I was at Diamond by chance. This was scheduled long before this actual session was scheduled, and a student wrote me a letter. If I had the letter with me, I would read it to you. She wrote me a letter inviting me to come see what they were doing in PBL at Diamond. So she wanted me to look at her project-based learning. And they had it in the courtyard. She met me at the door. She was my tour guide. We went through each of the projects. And what I can tell you is it is very different than the projects that maybe I was used to back in the day, or some of you have experienced. And those types of projects waste kids' time, waste the opportunity. They don't challenge in ways that we want them to be challenged. The projects I saw today were entirely different. Kids were engaged at a level that I haven't seen in a long time, and they were answering really challenging problems about the world. Part of what I wish is that we could figure out how to have them answer challenges here in our community, because I think that could be very interesting, and it could be a great partnership with the experts again in the community. What this particular group of students was doing today, the topic was, they had to talk about immigration, and the teacher gave them the topic, and then they had to explore the topic, and they had to put their own spin on it. So there were kids doing climate migration. They changed the topic to kind of suit their needs and talked about people moving from countries because of the climate, and talked about how they don't have the means to be able to move. Part of each of the projects included an interactive session. So the young lady who was doing the presentation on climate actually had me, talk about what I did for work and what my family situation was, and based on that, where would I move? And then she engaged with me in a conversation about the choices compared to some people who didn't have the choices perhaps that I had, which suggested to me she was learning it at a higher level. They integrated different disciplines into their work. Two young boys were talking about Sudan, and they had been inspired by a book that they read, so they were talking about migration that happened there. In their particular session, one thing that stood out for me is they were trying to figure out how to move their audience and get people to be inspired to do something to make changes for this country. So they showed how much food, and they did it with rice, but this is the equivalent of what somebody would get in 3 months' time. This is what people in the United States get, and then they did it with water, and then they talked about the filtration systems, and they were talking about how the environment is suffering as a result. And anyway, I got to the school at 2:30. Their day was ended at, I think they were getting done at like 2:45. I was meeting the young lady. A number of children stayed until about 3:45, and they would have stayed longer except for I had to go. They were so excited to tell me about what they learned. So I talked with them, I took some pictures, I'll put them on Twitter, you can see the kids. And I said, I have to go to this meeting tonight, so I really have to get going. I had to go to a union event as well. I said, but some people want to talk about PBL. Some people like it, some people don't like it. What do you think? What should I tell them? And one little boy, very cute, mouthful of braces, said, well, kids like it. And I said, well, that has to mean something, doesn't it? And then they started talking. I said, well, why do you like it? That's not a good enough answer. Why do you like it? Tell me what's cool about it. So they talked about their topics. They talked about big, essential questions. So they were answering big, challenging questions about the world, trying to think about their place in the world and whether or not they could make a difference. They also talked about, we want to speak about student agency, the ability to select on their own, make their minds up about the topics. They talked about time management and things of that nature. They have to apply to be project managers, so they kind of go through a quasi-job sort of experience, which is useful. They talked about how difficult it was to coordinate. One of the groups had they had a tent and they were replicating a refugee camp, and they were showing kind of what would be in it and how the people lived, and their display fell down 7 times, so they had to work together to try to figure out how to make a bigger, stronger, better display, and they had to rely on the resources of one another to be able to do it. So if ever I was on the fence, I would say to anybody, suspend your disbelief, wait until you talk to children and see what they know. And I think for the community, if we could open up the kind of experience that I was able to have today to the community, you might be moved in different ways too when you hear from students who are passionate, who want to stick around with a superintendent who's kind of boring, probably, after school to talk about what they're learning, and they missed their bus and called their parents so they could spend some more time with me. I think that is pretty compelling evidence that there's something there that we have to think about. But I want to reinforce the point that it is not required. We and I want to trust our teachers to know when to use it, when not to use it, what makes sense for their classrooms, and that's the message that we've put out this year. It's a choice.
And also, the district has invested in professional learning for us so that then we can make informed choices, that we actually understand fully what project-based learning is and how it might look in each of our disciplines, so that then we can make informed choices about if, where, how it would work in our curriculum. But I certainly haven't felt any pressure from the superintendent all the way down to my direct department head to implement something that I'm not comfortable doing or I don't think would make sense with my curriculum. So it's definitely it's an opportunity for us to learn more and think about how could we have our students learn in a new way and in a really meaningful way when it makes sense.
Great. So it sounds like it's an optional tool, innovative tool. The school district is thinking about it. Right now, there's no plan to replace it, like say, how we learn chemistry as an individual. I'm not going to mention that. So the classic foundational knowledge, which is based on individual learning, that's not the intent to do that. It's just merely an optional, innovative tool for the school district to utilize what is appropriate. And is that fair?